Okay, so I decided I'm going to just go ahead and make this other video about caregiving right after that first one I did. So, just making sure I'm not breathing on my mic a little bit. Now, what I'm talking about here is caregiving that when someone becomes disabled, because it can be a bit different from having to take care of a child who is born disabled and throughout their life. It's different because it's kind of, you kind of know from birth that they're going to need lifelong care, maybe. But, maybe somebody in your family has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, or they have Parkinson's, or they have a stroke, or they get in a car accident and just very suddenly or very slowly. But the point is that someone becomes disabled. And it happens, it happens. Either suddenly or slowly, but it happens. And all of a sudden, you become a caregiver. The responsibility of caregiving is dropped in your lap. And, for some people, that's fine. Like, whatever. Maybe they have the money to afford carers to help. But when you don't, or you're told you don't qualify for help for a very, very long time, it is very traumatic. It destroys your mental health. It builds resentment. It ruins your life. And it's not the fault of the disabled person, but your entire life becomes interrupted by their needs, their care. You almost don't get your life anymore because you have to be like their hands and their feet, and you have to think for them sometimes. Depends on where the disability is. And you have to do all the care that would normally fall to many people on a hospital staff. I mean, like, you're a personal assistant, you're a butt wiper, you're dressing them, you're feeding them, you're a nutritionist, you're a physical therapist, you might be a mental therapist, you're a chauffeur, you are basically their brain in some instances. Like if they have advanced dementia and they can't think of how to get dressed, you got to dress them. They can't think of how to turn off a light, you got to turn off all the lights they've turned on. And if they have a degenerative condition that disables them, then over time they become less and less able, and you have to do more and more. And eventually your life is no longer your own. You are theirs. You are just their tool. And if their condition comes with sudden exacerbations, or they have falls and they get hurt and it's a hospital visit where there's more care and then they improve a little bit, but there's still more, and it's just more and more and more and more. And if you never wanted children, it can be like the responsibility of taking care of a child, except it's never going to get better. They're never going to become more independent. They're either going to become what they are now, or they'll become even more dependent on you over time. And if you don't have help, like I said before, it destroys you mentally, it destroys you physically. Caregivers often die before the person they're taking care of because of, they cannot get away to address their own needs. So their own medical problems just snowball and snowball and snowball. And as they get sicker, things get worse for the disabled person or the sick person or whatever. And then finally the caregiver drops dead. And now the person that needs the care, they're just kind of in the wind. People who say that caregiving is rewarding and validating usually have a revolving door of help that comes in. So they can be like a wife, a daughter, a son, a child, a family member, a brother, a sister, a nibbling, a cousin, whatever, grandchild, whatever. They can be those things to that person instead of being like an entire hospital staff in one person. and then the relationship kind of gets lost. And what happens is that it builds resentment because more and more of your life is interrupted by them and their problems and their needs, and that is not the disabled person's fault. I am not blaming my dad for being disabled. A lot of my resentment for my dad comes from the fact that he was abusive and he would never, never take care of me the way we are kind of forced to take care of him for so many years before somebody said, wait, no, you do qualify for Medicaid. And they got us hooked in and we got help in here. But it was 11 years of misery before we got there. Like, that is how screwed up it is. And the system is designed to make it so hard to get help that people just give up and just fall over and die. Literally. That is what happens. But caregiving is absolute hell. And, maybe for some people, it's a good experience. And, I'm not going to pretend that my experience is the only one, but it's a warning. It is very much a warning that it is often a nightmare. It's a medical nightmare. It's a mental nightmare. And there will be trauma, most likely. And especially if the person you're caring for dies in a very ugly, scary way in front of you, that's even more trauma. I mean, my dad is still alive. Don't worry. If he had gone, I would make a video about it saying so. He's still alive. But I have read stories by people who they fell asleep and the person they were caring for like choked or something and died while they were asleep, and it's like, that's not your fault. Or maybe like their equipment failed and the alarm didn't wake them. That happens. And when you have no help, that happens. And it's terrible. It's terrible. But in the end, caregiving, it's just, at least in my household, it's ruined everybody's life, except for Marcy, my sister, because she doesn't live here. But me and Mom, we were on for 24/7. And literally, there was nothing in our life that was not interrupted by something Dad needed. And sometimes he would be obnoxious on purpose because he was upset, and so he made us all upset. He can turn my house into a screaming tinderbox in 3 seconds if he wants to. He'll get me and Mom fighting with each other. And often we won't know why we're fighting. He'll just say something that gets us both mad, and then we end up screaming at each other. It's horrible. So on top of just plain old caregiving, there are people like me who are stuck caregiving for an abuser that was abusive to them in their life. Excuse me. Hiccups, sorry. But for me, it was just emotional abuse and verbal abuse and psychological abuse. What about people who's, dealing with their uncle with Alzheimer's who molested them as a kid, and now he is trying to grab on them again? Because sometimes people with Alzheimer's, they become very sexual. And it could also be somebody that was so prim and proper and a prude even. And then they will start making sexual remarks, because that part of their brain, the frontal lobes that live here, they're the behavior gatekeepers, as T-Snow says. They are the gatekeepers, and in Alzheimer's, it does this. Things get through that normally wouldn't, those impulses. And in dementia, Alzheimer's more specifically, this part of the brain is one of the first to go. So Grandma, who never swore in her life, might start calling people really horrible things. She might start saying slurs, like racial slurs. That happens in Alzheimer's. So that uncle or that auntie or that relative who maybe molested someone as a kid might start grabbing and touching them again because they think that this person is their little 4-year-old relative that they were doing that to. Or they might go after other kids, and they don't have the impulse control to say, I should do this in secret. They'll just do it. And can you imagine the trauma? Now imagine having to be that person's caregiver because literally no one else wants to deal with them. But someone has to because nobody can afford to put them somewhere. Yeah. Can you see? Do you get it now? So, like, when disability is just dropped onto your head, or it's a gradually snowballing issue that gets worse with time, it's a nightmare when you don't have help. And I'm just grateful that we got some. There's help in here now, but at any time, Medicaid could just decide to say, and take it all away. And if that happens, I don't know what we're going to do. But this is just a warning for other people who may have that happen in the future. Your parents are aging and maybe they're not doing too well. Be prepared for that. It's hell. It really is hell.